Welcome everyone, both here in the Zoom room with us and on Facebook. I think that's recording correctly, so bear with us if it's not, we apologize. But we are, I don't even know, I think this is webinar number 8 or number 9 in our 15-part series to get everybody prepared for the big game draw. And I apologize because we had this one scheduled last week and I had an emergency and I had to cancel last minute, and I apologize to everybody, but we went ahead and jumped in on a Tuesday instead of our typical Monday and Wednesday to get the content before the draw. And as you can see on the screen there, the deadline is February 9th. It's tomorrow at 5 p.m. to apply for Bear and Turkey. So if you are planning on applying, don't delay. As soon as we're done talking with Casey tonight and you get all of the hot tips from her, you can get your applications in and be ready to go. The next deadline is going to be the harvest reports, and that's next Tuesday on February 15th. And that's the harvest report, so it doesn't have any late fee. So definitely get them done so it doesn't cost you, I believe, $7 if you're late. So so start working on those. A couple of housekeeping things just to get started. We are recording the session as we have all of them, and we will get it posted up on the department's YouTube channel. It usually takes us a few days, so probably by the end of the week, they'll be posted up there. You can review it, see if you missed anything or want to circle back around. If you have questions after the Zoom, it will be on Facebook tonight. So if you have questions and need more information before the draw deadline tomorrow, you can go ahead and review it on our Facebook channel. And I'm going to double check, but I believe our Spanish translator is in the participant list. So if anybody has a question in Spanish, we can definitely bring Darren in and he can translate that for us. And I will do my best to incorporate all of the comments and the questions and answers. So if you do have a Q&A or a question, I guess you may not have answers. We'll rely on Casey for answers. If you have a question, please feel free to type it in the Q&A and we will try and work relevant questions into the conversation. I'll also try and keep track of Facebook just to make sure those questions are answered as well. So I think we hit all of the housekeeping stuff, Casey. And I was just telling you before we went live that I'm super excited because I think I've done 5 or 6 webinars with you, and this is the first one where you're not in the field. So can you introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about you and a little bit about what you do every day?
Sure. I'm Casey Cardinal. I am the resident game bird biologist at the department. I've been here, oh man, we're coming up on 7 years, which is crazy. The time really just flies. And so what I do every day, I try my best to figure out what's going on with game birds in the state and manage them accordingly. So I work primarily on quail and turkeys are my 2 majors. And then I also cover dusky grouse, pheasant, and harvestable tree squirrels. So I can talk more about any of that if you want.
Yeah, I think that would be great. And I always get a kick because it sounds so funny to me when people say resident, the first thing I think of is resident hunters or anglers that are licensed buyers. But I always get a kick out of your title, the resident game bird biologist. And so essentially what I've learned is that it's everything that isn't migratory, or most everything that isn't migratory.
Yeah, so the list of Migratory Bird Treaty Act, there's a list of birds associated with that. And so my class of birds are called galliforms. It's a class that includes chicken-like birds, grouse, turkey, quail, pheasant, partridge. And so they're not included under the Migratory Bird Treaty Act. And so they fall basically in state management. Technically, they're not migratory on a state or continental scale, but a lot of them may make small migrations. Like you talk about dusky grouse, and they have different summering range than wintering range. So it's not that they don't migrate, it's just that their migrations usually don't span states and don't need as much state collaboration for management. So.
And your day and your year seems to vary a lot. And I truly think you're in the field more than just about anybody in this agency. And like I said, this is the first time we had one in-person webinar, but everything else has been, you've been in a car in the Palencinos doing surveys. So what do you do? What does your average year look like?
Yeah, I'm just gonna write one caveat. I think our non-game avian biologist is in the field more than I am. She's got the coolest job. But so I feel like when I've tried to break it down, maybe I'm in the field 50-50, but maybe it's more. And so like an average field year in winter when turkeys are more grouped up is when we spend a lot of time working on them. They're easier to count in the winter. They're easier to trap in the winter. They're a little more predictable in what areas they can be found ish. I mean, every time I say that, they do something silly and I'm like, oh my God, I don't understand turkeys at all. But yeah, since they're grouped up, they're just easier to work with. And so winter, I spend a lot of time working on turkey stuff. And then as spring rolls around, I spend a lot of time doing like call counts for quail. We're going to be embarking on a dusky grouse project, so we'll be trapping dusky grouse. That will kind of continue and bring me into the summer. Summer, I spend a little bit more time in the office. We have a lot of like federal aid grant stuff to work on. So applying for new grants, reporting for our old grants, harvest reports, thinking of new projects and making sure that they like get approved by like federal level. We have to fill out compliance kind of paperwork. And so summer is more of an office time for me. The birds are kind of nesting and a little more low key, not as easy to find. And then in fall, we ramp back up with more quail stuff, a little more dusky grouse stuff. And yeah, that brings us back to winter. So I guess we'll say field 3/4 of the time, since that seems like my year.
No, that's great. And then I know you also get to go out and do some other cool projects like ptarmigan trapping and other things that aren't directly impacting your job, but a lot of the coworkers in your section.
Yeah, we're pretty lucky in the agency since we're maybe a smaller state agency compared to some others. We get to help on more projects, and like especially in the bird program, it's really fun to, like you said, trap ptarmigan or go out and survey prairie chickens and help how we can so that it's easier for our coworkers.
That's great. Okay, so to jump into, I do want to mention, you mentioned harvest reports. And I was on a webinar with you, I think like a week ago. You were talking about quail and
Oh yeah.
But you know, we always say that harvest reports are required for a lot of the big species, a lot of the draw species. And a comment was made in that webinar that we encourage people to do their harvest reports for quail and some of the small game species as well. And I'm sure that just helps you collect data and make educated decisions. Is that right?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And so like turkey is a mandatory harvest report, and that is because it's just maybe a touch more like a big game species than a quail. Like for turkey, we really want to know what percent of the population or what percent of people are harvesting. And then we use the number of turkeys to kind of estimate the population in the state and really monitor like what units are losing success and what units are gaining success and just somewhat trend our turkey population that way. And then for small game, it's important to us. I mean, their reproduction or reproductive potential is amazing. So we don't restrict harvest as much for small game, but like in years where they're having a bad year, we still want to know like what people are getting out and what they're seeing. And so like we will link like an amount of birds per hunter or catch per unit effort tends to be an important like variable for us. So for like I guess like quail, pheasant, chicken biologists. So it still is important, even though it's not mandatory. We really appreciate the information.
Well, thank you. That comment last week struck with me, and I just wanted to make sure and bring it up. But jumping into the kind of meat and potatoes of the conversation tonight, I want to start with kind of the very basic. And can you just talk about what kinds of turkey we have in New Mexico and where you're going to find them?
Absolutely. Am I allowed to share my screen?
Yes, you should be able to.
Okay, I'm just gonna bring up this quick PowerPoint because I feel like it's easier than me. Why aren't you doing? Okay, is that showing up as full presenter mode or?
No, it still has your slides on the left.
Oh, I hate this thing. Okay, let's see. Oh, maybe that one. Okay, now?
Yes, that looks
Perfect.
great.
Okay, so throughout the US and down into Mexico, there are 5 subspecies of wild turkey. And so it's really exciting in New Mexico that we have 3 of them. Not many states have 3, and even fewer states have 3 naturally. So all of the species that we have, or subspecies we have here, naturally did occur in New Mexico. And although there has been introductions in places where they weren't historically found, yeah, it's really neat that we have this. So in New Mexico, whoops, I forget some of the things that are in my slides. So part of the way you can determine the different turkey subspecies is by the terminal band on their tail. And it seems like a gradient of darkness to light as you go from east to west. So like Easterns and Osceolas are going to have a pretty brown chocolatey type terminal band. And then Rios get a little bit tanner. I don't know how they describe Merriam's because they call it white, but then when I look at a Gould's turkey, I'm like, that's white. So I don't know, off-white for Merriam's, and then a Gould's has that really pretty white terminal band. Okay, and so as you can see here, this is my friend Scott. He was able to harvest all 3. His Rio was from Kansas, but it still counts. So the white one is the Gould's on the top. The lower left one is a Merriam's, and the right one is a Rio. So kind of just has them next to each other to really compare and contrast how that band or how the terminal band looks. So, and then as you can see on the right, that's the general turkey habitat range in New Mexico. They really have unique habitat types for the 3 different ones. So Merriam's turkey, they're definitely like the New Mexico turkey species. They're more of a mountainy type turkey. They tend to be found above 7,000 feet, mostly because they utilize ponderosa pine as their primary roosting tree. And so that's kind of when you start getting into that more reliable pondo pine out of like a pinyon juniper type habitat. As far as Rios in New Mexico, at least, they're mostly associated with our river valley corridors. Oftentimes here, like they're coming in from Texas along, the Canadian or up like the Pecos River. And then they were introduced on the Rio Grande. So in New Mexico, they're not actually native Rio Grande turkeys on the Rio Grande. They're probably native in Texas on the Rio Grande, but not here. And so in these areas, they're going to use cottonwoods. They tend to do maybe a little bit more agricultural scavenging because that's where a lot of our farm fields are. But anyways, so, and then finally, Gould's turkeys are only found in the very southwest corner in the boot heel. They are currently listed on the state threatened list, so there's just a tiny bit of hunting opportunity, not like a big over-the-counter or anything like that. And so they use this more like Madrean pine, which is kind of a grassy savanna type pine or grassy savanna habitat. They use oaks and pines and sycamores as their primary groups. So, and yeah, so that's our general turkey. Oh, hopefully I stopped sharing. Nope, there we go. So yeah, that's our rundown of our 3 subspecies.
That's great, with pictures and everything.
Yeah.
So with the Goulds, I want to talk about them first, just because we have a question. But you mentioned that there is a small number that can be harvested each year. And so how are those tags allocated?
Sure. So since they're listed as threatened, as a state species, not as a federal, we have to protect them from intentional take, I think. And so they're not technically a species that we're allowed to hunt. And so I think in 2006, the legislator authorized them to go into the enhancement license system. And so enhancement licenses are sold through generally a nonprofit who works on wildlife, and then they take like the fees associated with that and everything else that goes into like the license, either it's an auction or a raffle, all the monies raised through that goes into either turkey habitat work or turkey habitat research. So pretty much all the money that you spend trying to get an enhancement tag goes back into like improving things for Gould's turkeys, which is, I mean, such a neat program.
It is. And you have a big project that you're leading with the delisting efforts. And I don't want to get into that too much tonight. I'm sure we'll have more public meetings on that later. But the information's all on our website, I believe, if people want to go check out where the delisting process is at.
Yeah, it's been a huge process. So me and the species recovery coordinator, we've been collaborating on a big research project that we started. I guess the recovery plan was finalized in 2017. And one of the objectives in it was to really just learn more about this species. When they were listed, just not a lot was known. The technologies used to track birds was so much lower. And so now we can use like GPS on them and cool stuff like that. And so starting in 2018, we were backpacking these birds and we're using the data that we gathered through that study to inform the delisting investigation. And as you said, right now, we're in the process of me and him are writing this plan. It'll go out to public, or it'll go out to university review, probably in April. And then, in March. And then in April, it'll be available. I think after it's presented to the commission, it'll be available for public review. And like you said, we'll have public comment meetings. So right now, we're like, if you have any information on Gould's turkeys that you think is pertinent to the investigation, that's what we're looking for right now. So there'll be tons of opportunity to comment on the plan and what you think of our thoughts as soon as it comes out in April through, I think, August or something. So yeah.
An extended period of time.
A ton of time, yeah.
And then looking at the other species, the Rio Grandes and the Merriams, how are they doing? Has there been any shift in populations over time or in different parts of the state, or are they staying pretty stable?
I mean, generally stable. So Rios actually are probably doing better. Like I said, they tend to use some of those agricultural habitats, which is more of a stable food source. And so maybe they're not quite as susceptible to fluctuations like drought and things like that. So you do find them kind of concentrated in large groups in some areas. And so maybe they're doing too well in some areas and you just don't find them in others because there's not like a roost tree component or they haven't found it yet. So they're always just going to be in a small area in the state, but I'm guessing they're always going to be doing fairly well in that small area of the state. And then Merriam's, it's hard to monitor them like aggressively since they're in these mountain habitats. There's not a lot of roads. There's not like a golden standard of turkey monitoring protocols for any of the states in the nation. So it's harder to track that a little bit. We track it through hunter numbers a lot and harvest success rates. But my guess is with the drought we've had the last couple of years, and I think it was a kind of a pooey mast crop year, I think Merriam's numbers are down coming into this year, and maybe we're down last year too. So
hopefully we get a good mast season and I'm guessing mast, we talked a little bit about mast with Rick when we talked about bears, but I'm guessing it's the same kind of nuts and berries.
It really is. Yeah. I mean, turkeys are super opportunistic. So some of their big ones that they really like are like juniper berries and pinyon nuts and acorns. They're huge in acorns. But like we consider any berry on a shrub, so like a sumac or anything like that as mast that they'll use. Turkeys luckily can eat a bunch of other things like grass seeds. They get super into that. For both adults and chicks especially in the summer, they get really into insects. It's primarily what chicks eat the first couple weeks of life. So, and one cool one that Scott Lyric, he was the former NWTF biologist, now in Carlsbad, but he had this photographer send him a picture of a Gould's turkey with like a lizard in its mouth. So they really eat, well, they'll eat like a ton of stuff. But,
Sounds interesting.
yeah, they're interesting, but I mean, it is similar mass to bears. So like if Rick puts his mass surveys on the common drive, so that's really helpful for me to at least see like how the different ranges did.
Yeah, absolutely. I guess I hadn't thought about turkeys overlapping that much with what bears eat, but it makes total sense as you're explaining.
I know those crazy mountain species.
Do you have any tips when you were talking about the Rio Grande and kind of living, or I'm sorry, the Rio Grande, living in those the agricultural areas? In my mind, that sounds like it could be a little bit harder to hunt and to really know where you can hunt. Do you have any tips for people on how to find good places for Rios?
Yeah, I mean, if you know a private landowner, that's going to be your best bet. It is harder for sure. And so my recommendation is to like look at those river valleys, and your best bet is probably going to be like a BOR land, or if you're along the Rio Grande, Middle Rio Grande Conservancy District land, or BLM land. And so like look at the range map and just try and like align a public land map of where you think they could be. And I mean, turkeys do move. Just because they go into the egg field doesn't mean that they spend all of their time there. And if you can get them, like a lot of times those cottonwoods will be right on the river. And so if you can get on public land by the trees, there's a better chance that as soon as they come off the roost, you can maybe tempt them away from the food before they head to just eat all day. So
Interesting. And part of the question was specifically about La Jolla. And last night we talked with Rex Martinson about access. And he had mentioned on some of the WMAs, the wildlife management areas, that they aren't open for hunting every species. And so if you go to our website and search for those WMAs, it'll tell you what can and can't be hunted and some of the specific rules and regulations. So I would check that out if you're looking at La Jolla and some of those properties down on the Rio Grande.
yeah, in the rib, so for turkey in the rib, it is listed as open statewide. And then below that, it tells you all the things that are closed. And a lot of those are WMA.
Okay. We lost your audio just a little, Casey, but in the RID, the rules and information booklet, you can find those listed WMAs. Cool. And so jumping back into our outline, I was looking at it and there's 10 hunts that are allocated specifically for the draw. So what are different about those hunts versus the ones that you can purchase over the counter?
Sure. So we tend to define our draw hunts a little bit more by where we're worried about turkey populations and where we don't want overharvest. And so a lot of those draw tags will be in units where turkeys were like reintroduced. And
Casey, can you lean in closer to your microphone? I think that maybe it's just not catching you up quite all the way.
sorry. Okay, is that any better?
Yes, that's better.
Sometimes my computer is really fussy too. Okay, so yeah, like we tend to, I'll just start over. We tend to do our draw hunts a little bit more by what populations we don't want to overharvest. So if we think they're a little bit more susceptible to overharvest, those are the ones that we put into the draw. So it'll be units like 2A was an area where turkeys were reintroduced, I think in the 90s. And so we're worried that that population's still a little fragile, and we don't just want people running all over and taking all the birds. And so that's like a limited number of hunts. And then if you think about like 55A, the Vividal, areas where they don't want a ton of people because elk are really susceptible to like issues with calving, and you don't want to disrupt that. So like units like the Via Caldera and 55A, they tend to be for protecting other species a little bit more. So they could still be really good units. And then the WMA is that there is a turkey presence, but we don't want like a bunch of people, but we want them open. Those go into the draw too. And there are kind of some exciting opportunities. Speaking of the draw, like the youth hunts, especially the Washington Ranch youth hunt, like that one's really cool. It gives this opportunity for kids to go in a closed unit and take birds and get a chance at a Rio. So yeah, it really, each of the hunts is unique and why it's in the draw.
That's interesting to kind of look at some of those breakdowns and see where we limit hunters and, and where we want to limit them the most, I guess.
Yeah, but I had a hunter call me today and asked about success rates. So I just threw up last year's, and like the people who reported, like maybe 60 to 80% of people who hunted those draw units reported, and like all of them reported harvesting. So it's not necessarily that there are less birds or you'll have less opportunity, but we just don't want too many birds to be taken.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
And then looking at the draw, do you know if it's broken out the same way as like elk and deer, with 84% going to residents, 10 to the outfitter pool, and 6 to non-residents?
I'm pretty sure it is. I don't actually know how it works with turkey since there's so few tags. I'm gonna guess yes, though.
that would make sense to me as well. But
yeah,
we can definitely look that up if someone's interested in that specific breakout. And then I wanted to talk about some of the hunts that were specific to residents and that the non-residents were not able to apply for, and what is different about that.
Sure. So in statute, actually, New Mexico statute, they define that all like wildlife management area hunts would be exclusively for New Mexico residents. And so like you're seeing Marquez and the Huey and stuff like that. Those are only resident hunts, and that's why.
So very similar to like the cow elk hunts and they're on those.
Absolutely.
Makes sense. And then the youth hunts I think are really interesting. That the Washington Ranch hunt that you mentioned, I love getting the pictures from those every year. And I mean, those, I think it's 4 tags. Those youth are some of the luckiest people, and the conservation officers down there take them out. It's a guided hunt essentially, and they get lots of swag and all kinds of stuff. It's the pretty great.
Those guys in the Southeast, like Josh Waldrop, Don Norton, they have made that thing totally awesome. They're rock stars when it comes to that hunt, and really their youth pheasant hunt too. Those guys are just great about working with the kids and making it a really good experience. So
absolutely. And then my next question about the draw, we did have one that when results would be available, and I typed that out, but they will be out on or before February 23rd. So if you apply, you will know by the end of the month if you got drawn. But Casey, I know if I apply for elk, I can attach with several other people. So if I apply for turkey, can I attach with anybody?
You can. You can put 2 applications in together. So you and your best friend could apply for turkey hunts. And I think we talked about this a little bit earlier. It makes sense since most of them are like, well, 20 tags or less. A couple of them are 100, but I think if you put 4 people in on a 20 tag hunt, you're like 1/5 of the hunt. So you have just 2.
Great. And selfishly, there's not a lot of tags in those hunts, so I'm not attaching with anybody.
Well, I mean, it could decrease your odds of drawing. So there has to be 2 open slots.
That's true. That's true. But if my partner gets a lower number, then I don't know. It's such a catch-22. So switching gears a little bit and looking at the over-the-counter, or was there anything else you wanted to mention about the draw?
Just one thing. So I'm gonna just plug this. Bosque del Apache also has a draw hunt that's not run through our department, but it is in the Rib. And it's also an opportunity for youth to get out on the refuge and hunt turkeys. So even though that's not part of our draw, they also do have a turkey hunt that could be worth applying for if you're a youth.
Oh, that's a good one. Is that just
Mhm.
on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service website?
Yes, it is. Yeah. So if you go to their website, there's a link to go on and apply. So.
Great.
Mhm.
So looking at over the counter, is there any restrictions on who can purchase an over the counter? I'm assuming as long as you haven't been revoked or something like that. But is there any restrictions on who can apply or who can purchase an over the counter?
No, as long as you have a valid state hunting license, you can put in or you can get an over the counter tag. You're only allowed like one over the counter spring turkey tag. So only 2 turkeys in the spring, one in the fall through a fall tag. But yeah, no restrictions.
And can you purchase those tags now, or do you know when they go on sale?
They go on sale closer to April. I think it wouldn't be until March 23rd or so. But yeah, usually it's about a week before everyone's able to buy their April 1st license, so that if you want your tag mailed to you, they have a couple weeks before the season to get it to you.
And that's an important part when you're applying for the draw, because it just costs the $7 for residents or $13 for non-residents to apply for the draw. But if you are drawn, you do have to go back in and purchase your turkey license after the draw has been completed.
Yeah. Mhm.
So that's important. Yes. And I don't know. I always go back in and do that and whatever else I can get at the same time as soon as
Yeah.
it's on sale. Um, and then when you go in and you get an over the counter tag, do you have to declare an area where you're going, or just any open land you're welcome to go to?
Yeah, that's the nice thing about over the counter. You can try basically anywhere in the state that's listed or not listed as closed. So, like if you head out to, I'm just going to pick a random unit. It doesn't say anything about the turkey population in this unit, but if you head out to like 6, A or C, and you're like, oh man, there are no birds this year, it sucks. You could head up to 51 or 52 and try that. Like, it's great. You can try anywhere you want. So.
Absolutely. Which is pretty cool. And um, well, I'll come back to that. I'll work through our other questions first. But um, when you purchase that over the counter, do you have to select a weapon type, or for spring turkey, is it just you can hunt with a bow or a shotgun? Can you use anything else?
Um, oh man, I didn't know that would be a question. So yeah, spring turkey is going to be any legal sporting arms. So I think crossbow, bow, and shotgun are all legal weapons in the spring. And then in the fall, it is divided into 2 different hunts. There's an archery bow only hunt in September. And then in November, there's going to be any legal sporting arms. So anything you want to use, bow, shotgun, crossbow would be legal in November. And so even in the fall hunt, you don't have to specify which one you're going for. If you want to try archery in September and you don't harvest, you can use that tag to go in November again.
So I could purchase my spring turkey and harvest 2, and then purchase another fall turkey and harvest 1. So you could potentially harvest 3 birds in a year.
You can, although if you're not successful in your spring one, it doesn't roll over to fall. They're two separate tags.
You have to buy it.
Yeah.
What's the bag limit in the fall? I'm sorry, in the spring. Is it any bird?
It is any bird that has a beard. And so really just make sure when you're looking at your bird, because Jake sometimes will have a nubbin, but as long as the beard is visible outside of their like chest feathers, it's a legal bird. And then about, I don't know, 10% of the hen population could be bearded in different areas. And so those are technically legal birds as well.
Okay. And do you have to keep that beard, I'm assuming, in the spring?
Yeah, definitely. In the spring, when you're transporting the bird from the field into your home, it has to be the beard and like the surrounding feathers, like a patch of feathers. So probably like this would be fine. Yep. And then you keep that with you until you get to the final storage place.
Okay.
Mhm.
Good to know. And so what tips do you have? And this, I was going to say this a bit ago, but in my head, it's easy to hunt turkeys, but I have yet to harvest one. So I'm thinking it's not as easy as I do. And we have a mutual friend who said that he hiked over 90 miles to harvest his 2 birds last spring. So that's telling me that my brain doesn't quite add up. But what tips do you have for somebody that wants to hunt turkey in the spring?
Um, well, my primary tip would be to go to the department's website, and Storm Usery has done like a bunch of different like talks and articles, and he has a really good one. He's probably one of the best turkey hunters I've ever met, and he did one on spring turkey hunting. So I'm gonna steal a few tips from him. Anyways, one of his biggest ones is like pre-season preparation, and so making sure you're practicing your calling, making sure you have your camo, and that where you're going to go, it matches the landscape, looking at the laws, making sure you have your license, stuff like that. And then he goes into like scouting. And so when I think about scouting for turkeys, uh, I, I'm I primarily am thinking about Merriam's because it is the New Mexico turkey. And so I'm thinking like mountain ranges that are good. And so then I go in and look at the harvest report and see like how many birds were taken. Is there areas with better success rates? Once you kind of figure out what unit you want to try, like look for areas of, I tend to hunt Forest Service land. So Forest Service land of that like 7,000 foot elevation, if you can tell, it's super hard on aerial imagery to tell like what tree is what. But if you can figure out like, oh, there's some pondos on a hillside and that looks like it might be a cattle tank or trough. And like those are all good components for a Merriam's turkey, and like little openings at the bottom between two hills. They're gonna go down and eat grass from that. And or like, oh, I see a logging road here, like a male could strut on that. So factors like that when you're looking at like an aerial are all things to maybe cue in for. And then like get out on the ground before season and check it out. That's gonna be really important. And like turkeys are nice. Like if they're chatting, they're really helpful in planning your hunt. So even before the season, like getting out and just trying to listen to see if you can hear gobbling. Because a lot of times, if anyone makes noise when they're up on the roost, they're going to be just, and so yeah, try and kind of plan where you want to attack once spring comes around. So uh, those are all like good preseason things. I agree with you. Like I work with turkeys all the time. I'm like, oh, I know where there's so many turkeys, all enclosed units. But why isn't it that easy when I go into the field?
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, part of it is the my darling husband is not an early riser, and so I want to be out like while the turkeys are on the roost while they're chatting. He wants to be out like after sunrise, after a burrito, stuff like that. So um, the turkeys are going to chat most right in the morning. So that's going to increase your odds a little bit more. But the friend you were talking about, the 90-mile hiker, he said that he thinks he's out at like 4 a.m. He's intense, but he thinks his like hunting sweet spot is 10 to 2. He thinks he's harvested his most turkeys then. And so maybe they're not chatting, but if you're chatting at them at that time period, they may still come check you out. Like they're maybe going to be a little more sneaky about it. So if you call, be patient, like give them time to come in. Don't just like, oh, no one answered and then run off because a turkey might be coming at you. So things like that. What else? What other advice can I give for? I'm not 100% positive. Yeah, persistence. I think that's a huge one. Uh, if you look at the harvest reports, most people don't harvest a turkey. It's not uncommon, so don't get frustrated. And like you, Tristan, and me, we've been trying a long time, and we're still trying to dial it in, and that's okay. One of these times, we're gonna get those darn birds nailed in, and then it's gonna happen. So
Yes. Maybe we can leave our husbands behind and go do a girls' hunt. And
I
we'll see how.
know. I think that early thing is kind of important. And like even getting out the night before, like you can put them to bed and then hunt them the next morning. Like the guys will sometimes gobble their way into the roost at night. And so yeah, they're when they're chatting, they're giving you a lot of chances to find them. When they're quiet, they're definitely more frustrating.
They can be sneaky.
They can.
So those spring seasons open up April, I believe 15th, if that's right. So what triggers that mating season in the spring? Is it daylight hours? Is it temperatures? But what seems to be the trigger for it?
I really think photo period has a lot to do with it, but there has been like a shift. Um, like biologists across the US have kind of noticed a shift that maybe they're starting to call later than they used to. And I think a lot of that kind of tracks with weather patterns. Like the males don't want to start, well, the males could really care less about when they start calling. You can hear birds in January, February, March, April. Like they're just chatting because they really want gals. The gals are going to be a lot more particular because they want to make sure that they have nesting, like decent nesting sites, and like they're going to be susceptible to late season snows, which could destroy a nest or freeze all the eggs, or um, they want to make sure that the excuse me, that the snow has thawed so that there's some moisture on the ground so that when they have chicks, there's food sources or that they get a nice spring rain. So hens are going to be a little bit more particular based on the weather. And so like the males are going to be ramped up. They do ramp down a little bit after like the first big mating push tends to be early April. And so then like early April, it drops off. And then as hens like start to lose nests and stuff like that, the guys get right ramped back up. And so they're hoping for either a second breeding from a failed nest or to find that loner hen who's finally coming around for them. So there's like two peaks of gobbling intensity in most turkeys.
And I recommend checking out, you mentioned Storm Ussery. He did a podcast with us, I believe it was in March or April last year, and he talked about calling tips. And he definitely has more refined skills than I would hope to have. But I would recommend people check that out because there was a lot of great tips about calling. And like you said, there's articles that he's written and lesson plans and all kinds of stuff.
Yeah, he's just a turkey hunting genius. So
Life passion. And, and going back, you mentioned that you recommend people look at the harvest reports. Are they available on our website for people to download and look at?
yeah, absolutely. So where you find the deer and elk reports, like if you're going into the hunting section, you just scroll down to harvest reports, and that brings up pretty much every species that either is mandatory or even not, because there's an upland report on there too. So yep, they're available on the website for the last 5 years, I think, something like that. Pretty good amount of data.
Great. I'll have to check it out. And I always tell people that if it's not easy to find, use the search function on our website because it works very well. So switching gears a little bit and looking at fall turkey, I feel like that's probably a different game in itself since it's not during the mating season. But what tips do you have for somebody who wants to go fall turkey hunting?
Yeah, fall. I mean, isn't it a little bit crazy? Like everyone thinks of turkey hunting in the spring, but like traditionally, all turkey hunting was pretty much fall hunting. And so now, like, we're kind of coming back to that. And so, if you're thinking about fall hunting, it definitely is a different animal. You're thinking about like male groups rather than like targeting a solo who's looking for ladies, or you're thinking about like a hen brood. They're kind of out of their poult stage at that time, like a hen chick conglomerate of like a bunch of hens and a bunch of broods that have merged up. So the most important thing is just finding the birds. some birds use similar habitats in the spring and fall. Some use very different habitats. So if you're like out on an elk hunt or a deer hunt and you're like, oh, look at that, there's a bunch of turkey sign. I mean, why not go back in November, or if you're archery hunting, try it out in September. If you can find birds, like that's the most important thing. They're going to be cued in on different things. And so we talked about the mass crop. Fall turkeys are like they're eaten all the time. Like they want to find those berries, they want to find those acorns, they're eating the last of the insects. Like food sources are huge in the fall. And so that's going to be more of a thing than like looking for the openings where a male could strut or something like that. So things like finding scratching, like turkeys will do a lot of digging to root up those little things on the ground. So looking for scratching and even, yeah, like I said, looking for the birds, that's super important. So, and then, some people say that you can't hunt, like that the birds won't answer in the fall. There's like variable opinions either way. It doesn't hurt to like try and call. And so like they're a little bit more protective of their food source and their flock group. And so if like a new hen is coming and yelping, they're like, oh man, we have to go protect the food source. So they may go to you to like scare you off. So why not give obnoxious yelping a try when you're out there in the fall? It could work.
You never know until you try it.
You don't. Unless you're a terrible caller like me and they're like, oh, I can't run, that turkey's diseased.
And so looking back at Gould's, you had mentioned that the Gould's turkey is through the enhancement program. So is that eligible for residents and non-residents? And how do you get more information about those enhancement hunts?
Absolutely. So it is, anyone can put in for either the auction or the raffle, resident, non-resident, international, anyone. And so we're pretty lucky in that we've had a really good collaboration with the National Wild Turkey Federation at their national convention, which is actually coming up next week. It tends to be Valentine's Day weekend. They auction that Gould's, the auction tag. And so we've been pretty lucky the last couple of years. It's been quite popular. And then the raffle is all run through the state chapter of National Wild Turkey Federation. So I think both of those things are on our, or like both of those, like where it's held is on our website under the enhancement hunt tags. Otherwise, like Googling NW or New Mexico NWTF, that's really good information for the raffle. They have a website and all the ticket sales are going on through the website. So
I know that's always a popular one that we try to get information out as well. So we'll try and put that up on our website and do some emails and stuff going into it.
Great. Mm-hmm.
So you've touched quite a bit on it, but I wanted to talk a little bit about, what does a year in a turkey look like? And so you've talked about it quite a bit, but can you give us kind of a highlight of what they're doing and what they're thinking throughout the year?
Oh, who knows what they're thinking? No, so yeah, I mean, we can kind of start in the spring because that's like when people think about turkeys. And so breeding is like the reason for the season, then. Males are gobbling because they want hens to come in. They want to pass on those genetics. And like a male tends to be a little bit more concentrated in his spring like territory, and a hen will like move around and find a bunch of different males to check out. So you're going to see a lot more movement from hens in the spring. And then after that, like they can move crazy distances to find a nesting habitat. It's intense. Like we have these turkeys in the Palencios that have the GPS backpacks on. We're like, oh, we know what they're doing. And they're like visiting the guys at their primary display area. And then they end up in this random canyon, like 7 miles away to nest that they've never been in before. So I don't know how they find the nest sites, but they do. And so like a hen nest site is going to be basically just a flat bowl on the ground. we've had hens like, bam, right on the open, typically next to a tree or next to a bush, or maybe not even a bush or like a rock, but like really visible. Like I don't know, I'd be super nervous if I was a hen, but for some reason it works for them. Like Arizona had this Gould study and they had a bunch of like cameras on their hens, and there's this turkey just sitting there open. A bear walks right by her, like didn't even stop. So I don't know how they're masking their scent or how they're camouflaging, but it works. And so the hens are going to hatch their nests out about May, June, if they're renesting into July. And then they're just focused on getting those chicks until they can fly. The first 2 weeks, chicks are super susceptible to mortality. They're susceptible to like cold weather if they can't brood under the hen, too much water, too little water. If they can't get dew or insects, they're gonna have trouble like keeping the water content high. So yeah, the once the chicks are about 2 weeks old, they can get up into a tree, and then they're a little bit more independent. So that first 2 weeks is really critical for production. And so in summer, the hens are going to be like finding other hens. They tend to do better in larger groups. After the breeding season, the males will tend to get into these bachelor flocks. A lot of times you see it'll be like a bunch of gobblers and like a Jake, and then a bunch of Jakes. So they do tend to segregate a little bit more by age and gender. And so going back to the hens, as they get into fall, like they're, like I said, looking for food. They just want to eat all the time. If they're not breeding, they're eating. And as we get into winter, we get these really big, they tend to be like multiple sex, multiple age class groups. Turkeys in the winter can get into really ginormous flocks. That tends to, I think, be a little bit to do with the cold. Like when they're roosting at night, they're still letting off heat. So it's kind of nice to have other turkeys generally nearby, and then a protection thing as well. And just to clarify, trees do roost in the trees. I forgot to say that, but so it's crazy to watch them like either go up into the tree or come up down out of the tree. But yeah, they're out there for protection, mostly from land mammals. They do tend to be a little bit vulnerable at night since they have terrible vision. So actually owls are kind of a big predator, but so yeah, that's kind of turkey in general. If they're not thinking about breeding, they're thinking about eating.
Well, like there's probably a joke there that I should say.
They're simple-minded creatures. We love them anyways.
Exactly.
I mean, I guess they're thinking they are prey species too. So they're always thinking about predators. So like when you see a turkey, like a bunch of them are like, most of them are eating. There's one sentinel who's just always on the lookout, or that cautious hen, or I mean, I feel like hens are more cautious. I don't know.
In general, it seems that way. And you said that they have bad night vision, and during the day they see pretty well, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, their daytime vision is amazing. Like any movement or I mean, camo is important, but really like you can cover your legs in grass and stuff and be pretty secretive. They might be cautious and I mean spot you, but for the most part, like yeah, if you're moving a lot, they are so receptive to that. But at night, like I think that's why they roost, is because they just I don't know if it's rods or cones that is for like night or light vision, but whatever the one is light, it's not good on them. And so yeah, at night they can barely see anything. So like when if you're going to roost a turkey and like hunt it, make sure you're by the tree in the dark. Otherwise that turkey's gonna see you. But in the dark of the night, they're like, what's happening out there? So
interesting. I did not know that. And covered a lot of ground, but is there anything that you wanted to talk about that we haven't talked about, turkey hunting or turkeys in general?
Um, I not that I can think of, like I mentioned, like for turkey hunting, patience and persistence is super important. But just turkeys in general, gosh, they're so fun. Like getting to research them and spend a lot of time with them it's been really cool. Like they're neat birds and they're just they're weirdos. Like I love them and they're weirdos. They do the weirdest things, but they're just really neat. So
That's awesome. We did have a question come in about memory. Do they seem to have a good memory? And for
I
instance, when they
I
hear you,
think
go ahead.
sorry. I really haven't done or read much about memory, but I do think that they remember things that happen. So one example is that we had these turkeys with the GPS backpacks on, and like one night they were all in this one area and they had been there for months, and then boom, the next night they were gone, and they're always here. And so I think that they can remember if there's like a massive mortality event. And then we went there, and it's hard to tell if you get to like a mortality scene after other predators could have picked at it, but it looked like potentially a bobcat had gotten into the trees and taken a couple turkeys down. And so, yeah, short-term memory, they're like, oh my gosh, we have to get out of here. And they must have remembered that that tree was unsafe for at least a couple months. They were gone, but like they came back. And so I think that like they might have short-term memory, but then it also seems like they know exactly what roost sites they want to go to every year. So they must have a decent memory of like, hey, that was a good area in the spring. I'm going to go back there. So, I mean, if you scare them one day, they're absolutely going to remember it like the next couple days. And if they interact with a hunter who's unsuccessful, like those turkeys are going to remember what happened. So they pick up some things that are really important to their survival. But I don't know if they're like super sharp and they're like, oh my God, that sign wasn't there yesterday. I should be terrified. So things like that, I think they're a little more fuzzy on.
Very interesting. They're very fascinating creatures.
Yeah.
Good. Well, Casey, I think we've answered all of the questions. I'm double checking that I had in my list. And so I wanted to tell you, thank you. I know that you're out in the field a lot and you're still in the office. I jutted out and came home to do the webinar. So I appreciate you staying late to do this. And thank you to everybody who joined us here in Zoom and on the Facebook platform. We appreciate all of the questions and your engagement in the conversation. Let me share those important dates because our next one is coming up tomorrow at 5 p.m. So don't delay. If you want to put in for bear and turkey, the application for those draws are due tomorrow at 5 p.m. So get them in sooner rather than later. And then if you have not yet done your harvest report for the big game species, get those in by February 15th, just to save a few extra dollars. You can do them up until March 16th and still be good for the draw, but get them in sooner rather than later and save a few bucks because why not? And then of course the draw deadline for most of the or all of the other species besides bear and turkey is March 16th. So definitely put those down and don't delay. We do have an incentive program this year. So if you apply early, you can qualify for some of those extra incentives, which are backpacks and gift cards, all kinds of great things. So again, thank you all for your time. Casey, thank you so much for your time. And I hope everyone has a great evening.